to Samaria, and he starts preaching, and he finds this guy. He was called the great power of God. He liked to entertain people with his magic arts. Well, he wasn't doing them by the power of God. It shows us that magic and the ability to do signs and wonders is not only limited to the Christian faith. You find things like this happening in voodooism, witch doctors, Hinduism, and various other religions that we would identify as false religions because they don't embrace Jesus Christ as Son of God. So here we find the false prophet who's able to do these signs and these wonders. In Acts chapter 13, Paul confronts a guy who's called Elymas. He was a magician who was trying to keep the government official, Sergius Paulus, away from Christ. And so he was doing his best to distract him and keep him away from the gospel. Jesus warned in Matthew 24:24 that false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Now notice, false Christs and false prophets are doing great signs and wonders. It just shows it's possible. Just because someone is able to do a miracle that looks like a miracle doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that they're telling you the truth. We have got to be discerning and not to believe every lie just because we see something spectacular take place through their ministry. Remember when Moses went to Pharaoh's court and God gave him the staff? He threw down that staff and it became a serpent. And the magicians of Pharaoh's court did the same thing. They threw it down and they can make theirs into serpents too. Moses turns the water of the Nile into blood. Well, their magicians were able to do the same thing. Now, their magicians were preaching the true message of the true and living God like Moses knew, but they were still able to duplicate these things. And whether they did it by sleight of hand or by actual miracles, I don't know. But it probably doesn't even matter in our discussion. They use these things in order to deceive. Verse 14 says, he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast. So his purpose for these miracles that are done in false religious systems is in order to deceive other people. That's the whole reason behind it. Listen to the words of God in Deuteronomy 13. This is verses 1 to 3. If a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder comes true, concerning which he spoke to you, saying, let us go after other gods whom you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you to find out if you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has counseled rebellion against the Lord your God. Same idea. They're doing signs and wonders, but they're leading people away from God. Verses 14 and 15. He tells those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, and it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast so that the image would even speak. Now, this is difficult to interpret. I'll grant that. I'll do my best. But it does remind me of something in our Old Testament that's very similar. Can you remember a time when a great leader erected a giant image of himself and required the Jews to fall down and worship it? Daniel chapter 3. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those courageous, gutsy men of God who refused to bow to the image of Nebuchadnezzar. This thing was made out of gold, and it was 90 feet high, 9 feet wide. Gigantic, and he made it out of gold to himself. It was an image to himself. And all the people, when they blew the clarinets and all the different musical instruments, the lyre, they had to fall down and before that image and prostrate in a form of worship. Well, we have something similar happening here with this false prophet. He tells the people, make an image of the beast. And if they won't bow down to the image of this beast, they're killed. I think this probably means that these false religious systems that are wedded to the state are able, Remember, he causes the image to speak. He gives it life. And so these false religious systems are able to deify the state and invigorate the state with life so that they deify it and acknowledge it as their highest authority and ultimate allegiance apart from God and apart from Christ is to the state that demands their allegiance. I think we perhaps saw something like that in World War II. You guys have heard Hitler give his speeches, haven't you? He sounds like a Pentecostal preacher, and he is speaking with all the passion that guy could muster. And the people are all behind him, raising. Is that what they did? They put their arm like this, Heil Hitler, and thousands upon thousands of them were showing their devotion to him as their leader and his ideologies that they were going to follow by that act, that outward sign. So there we have the miracles of this false prophet. There's one last thing that we need to look at, and that's the mark enforced by the false prophet. There is a mark that we read about here in verse 17 and 18. He causes all to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. That's from verse 16. So you might get the impression from this passage that only those who submit to the beast get this mark. However, when we read Revelation 7 and Revelation 14, we find out there's another group that also receive a mark, only it's not called a mark, it's called a seal. 144,000 are sealed. And they are sealed, same place that these other people receive the mark of the beast. So the mark of the beast is given on the right hand or the forehead. The seal is placed on the foreheads of the 144,000. The mark of the beast is either the name of the beast or the number of his name. And in the case of the 144,000, it's the name of the Lamb and his Father that is placed on them. You see, two very similar things are happening. Mark of the beast, the seal of the Lamb. And as in many other ways, we find Satan mimicking God. God seals his own, so I'm just going to mark my own. For most of my Christian life growing up, sitting under certain kinds of teaching, I was told that there's coming a day at the end of history where everybody's going to receive a literal mark. They speculate it's going to be a computer chip that they put under your skin or under the skin of your forehead, and people are going to buy and sell with these marks, and you won't be able to buy and sell unless you have the computer chip put inside your body somewhere. Because there's going to be a cashless society, they say. And so this is the way that you'll buy and sell under that society. I think that misses the point. I mean, maybe. And if someone demands that I get a computer chip, I'm going to say, I'm not taking the chip. But I don't think that's what he's getting at, because remember that these are visions. Visions are made up of signs. Signs point to a reality outside of itself, greater than itself. These are symbols, not to be taken in a wooden, literal fashion. So if they are symbols, what's going on? What is this mark all about? Well, I found some help in learning a little bit about history and slavery in first century Judaism and beyond. So in the first century, if you owned a slave and that slave ran away and was later returned to you, you could, as the owner, put your name tattooed on the forehead or the hand of that slave to designate that he was your property, so that, and you can't get rid of it because you can't erase tattoos. They're there for good for the rest of your life. And this is the way they were trying to tackle that problem of runaway slaves. We do the same thing today, don't we? The ranchers that have cattle, they don't want someone to steal their cattle, so they put their brand on the cattle. They take a logo of their ranch, sear it into them using a hot iron, and that brand is there to stay. It indicates ownership. Well, Ephesians 1, 13 to 14 says that Christians have been sealed with the Holy Spirit. What does that seal of the Holy Spirit indicate? It indicates that we belong to Christ. We're owned by him. Those who take the mark of the beast are indicating that they belong to the beast. They are owned now and ruled by the beast. Those that don't belong to Christ are marked out as belonging to this beast. But why the forehead and the hand? Now think back with me to Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 6. There we read that Jewish fathers and mothers were to diligently teach the law to their children. And further, it says there, they were to bind the law, as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. Now, some Jews in Jesus' own day took that literally, and they built little boxes and put little pieces of the law inside the box, bound them on their head, wore it like a headband, bound them on their right hand, and they walked around with these little boxes with pieces of the law inside of it. They took God, back in Deuteronomy 6, right at his word and took him literally. They were called phylacteries. Jesus even mentions them in Matthew 23, that they try to lengthen the phylacteries, to show off how devout they are by how much of the law is on their forehead or their hand. I think that wasn't the intent of God. I don't think he simply wanted them to bind the law on their hand and walk around with it. He wanted their deeds, their life, their actions, right, the hand, to be informed by the law of God. That the law of God would be worked out through their hand. He wanted the law of God to be in their minds so that they're thinking of the law of God and seeking to obey it. So the law is to be on their mind and it's to be on their hand, indicating that they believe it, know it, and live it out. And I think that's what we have here with the mark of the beast. These people are given a mark on their right hand or their forehead indicating ownership of the beast. And in Revelation 14:11, we're told that all those who have the mark of the beast worship the beast. So everyone who gets this mark, not only does he belong to the beast, but he worships him, gives him the highest allegiance. So, do we belong to Christ? Have we given our mind and our lives to Jesus Christ as the Spirit sealed us for Christ for the day of redemption? Or do we belong to the beast? There's really only two kinds of people in the world. Either you belong to the beast or you belong to Christ. Now, you may not be able to see a physical mark if you belong to the beast, but it's there because you've given your mind and you've given your life to doing his will rather than the will of God. Now, verse 17 says, he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. So what happens to people who refuse to give their allegiance to the state that's requiring allegiance? They face persecution, and that persecution could come in the form of economic boycotts. We saw that in the Second World War again in Nazi Germany when the Jews were the ones that were targeted, and they put the Star of David on their shops, and they were warned not to do any business with these Jews, and it was driving the Jews out of business, and eventually persecution got much worse than that, but that's how it initially got going, was this bias against them. Something similar to that seems to be taking place here in Revelation 13, a persecution that involves your finances, your ability to buy and sell. And then we come to this very famous verse, verse 18, that we've all heard so much about, 666. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. Now, notice verse 18. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. How do you do a calculation? You add numbers up. That's how you calculate, right? You do math on something.